The Minnesota Historical Society wanted to bring together some of the state's most talented storytellers and musicians to explore this history of our state. The American Civil War is a huge story. It's an immense topic to try to tackle. And the Minnesota Historical Society can't do it alone. So that's why it was so important that we partner with Minnesota Public Radio in this fantastic venue to share this performance live for an audience, and then beyond that, share it with a viewing audience and listening audience on NPR and TPT. And the more collaborators you have at the table, the more easily we're able to share this story on a statewide basis.
It was really a combination of music and storytelling. It was letters from home that were put to music and testimonial speeches from the time. Anytime that we can illuminate the Minnesota experience for the folks in Minnesota, that's a great thing, especially about issues that are not as well known, like how the Civil War changed the state of Minnesota.
We shall meet, but we shall miss him. There will be one vacant chair. We shall linger to caress him as we breathe our evening prayer. When a year ago we gathered, joy was in his pale blue eye, but our golden cord is severed, and our hopes in ruin lie. We shall meet, but we shall miss him. There will be one vacant chair. We will linger to caress him while we breathe our evening prayer. And our fireside sad and lonely, often will the bosom swell, and remembrance of the story, how our noble Willie fell, how he strove to bear our banner through the thickest of the fight, and uphold our country's honor in the strength of manhood's might. We shall meet, but we shall miss him. There will be one vacant chair. We will linger to caress him while we breathe our evening prayer.
Hello, I'm Dan Chenard, and I'm a Minnesotan. When the Civil War came in 1861, Minnesota was out there on the edge of the prairie for real, just barely a state. And maybe like lots of us, I was under the impression for a long time that the Civil War was something that didn't happen here. It happened far, far away from Minnesota. We sent some of our boys off to fight, and we waited for letters. And it wasn't until I got the call to write this show that I bothered to read many of those letters or go looking for those stories myself. Everywhere I go now, I stumble onto stories of the Civil War. Minnesota was right there in the thick of it, from battlefields and hospitals to the very nerve center of the Lincoln White House. It went to the very heart of us and this place, every town and every family. So tonight we're going to look back 150 years on stories mostly from the last months of the war. Some of them spoken, some of them set to music, all of them from people caught up in the epic events of the time, from Washington to Winona. 150 years ago, March 4th, 1865, President Abraham Lincoln stepped to the railing on the east side of the U.S. Capitol beneath the newly finished Capitol Dome to deliver his second inaugural address. People were tired and angry as the war ground on and on. It had been raining in Washington for a week, so people were standing in mud. He turned to face the crowd just as the sun peeked through the clouds for a moment. Here's an excerpt from the first part of his address.
At this second appearing to take the oath of the presidential office, there is less occasion for an extended address than there was at the first. 4 years ago, all thoughts were anxiously directed to an impending civil war. All dreaded it, all sought to avert it. While the inaugural address was being delivered from this place, devoted altogether to saving the Union without war, insurgent agents were in the city seeking to destroy it without war, seeking to dissolve the Union and divide effects by negotiation. Both parties deprecated war, but one of them would make war rather than let the nation survive, and the other would accept war rather than let it perish, and the war came. 1/8 of the whole population were colored slaves, not distributed generally over the Union, but localized in the southern part of it. These slaves constituted a peculiar and powerful interest. All knew that this was somehow the cause of the war. Neither party expected for the war the magnitude or the duration which it has already attained. Each looked for an easier triumph and a result less fundamental and astounding.
Dearest love, do you remember when we last did meet? How you told me that you loved me, kneeling at my feet. Oh, how proud you stood before me in your suit of blue, when you vowed to me and country ever to be true. Weeping, sad and lonely, hopes and fears how vain, yet praying when this cruel war is over, praying that we meet again. Weeping, sad and lonely, hopes and fears how vain, yet praying when this cruel war is over, praying that we meet again.
Weeping, Sad and Lonely was one of the most popular pieces of sheet music during the Civil War. Some of the officers actually thought that it was too depressing, and so they forbade it from being played in the camps. Music was a big part of the Civil War period. This period was one of the most prolific songwriting periods in all of American history, and how could it not be? It was a dramatic time. Everybody came to know suffering and loss. Big issues were at stake. People needed ways to come to terms with it. They bought sheet music and sang songs around the piano. They wrote letters. They read newspapers. There were 90 Minnesota newspapers during the Civil War. Can you imagine? It was a highly literate time, and we're going to hear a sampling of that literature as this show unfolds, starting with two pairs of Minnesota letter writers that we'll be checking in with later in the show. So I'd like to introduce them to you now by way of some of their first letters from the very beginning of the war. They give us a peek at that changing emotional landscape as the war progressed, and especially at the beginning when hundreds of young men all over Minnesota were walking to the nearest town and signing up. Madison Bowler is one of these young men who becomes a soldier right away. He's a 23-year-old single school teacher in a tiny town on the Mississippi River down near Hastings called Nininger City. And one of his pupils is a non-traditional student, the 20-year-old Lizzie Califf, and spoiler alert, the future Mrs. Bowler. When the war breaks out, he and Lizzie begin a prolific correspondence. Here's one of their earliest exchanges of letters. Madison has just signed up and marched off to Fort Snelling, and Lizzie is down in Nininger City. It's springtime.
May 2nd, 1861. My dear Lizzie, I shall not affect to believe that you do not feel bad to have me go away, for I know you do. I feel bad myself. I deplore the condition of our country that calls upon us to fight for it. But somebody must go, and who can go better than young men like myself? Oh, the fort is a beautiful place. The Mississippi on one side and the Minnesota on the other, while the green prairie extends back for miles. You wish to know if I have found any flowers. I have found a very few pretty ones, but there is one, always a flower to me, which I should prefer above all, but which I am not permitted to see now. But I have a picture of it, a great consolation to me. Truly yours till death, Madison.
May 11th, 1861. My dearest friend, I was so glad to hear you was well and seem to be in good spirits. Sometimes when I think of the way you are living at night after drilling all day, you must be tired enough to be on a good bed instead of lying on the floor. Perhaps I think about it more than you do, for I have not much else to take up my mind. I will tell you what we have been doing this week. On Monday, Percy got stuff to make a flag. On Thursday, we finished it, 19 feet long and 11 wide. They put it up today, about halfway between Reed's and Aunt Sarah's. We had a real nice time. There is hardly anyone moving around Nininger. Goodbye. I remain yours as ever, Lizzie. P.S. Don't get angry with me for writing you such a mess of stuff, and don't play cards anymore.
Here's the other pair of Minnesota correspondents I'd like you to meet, as they were at the very start of the war, William and Thomas Christie, brothers, half-brothers. Actually, William is 31 and single. He's left Wisconsin to go and try farming on his own in Minnesota near Winona, but it's not going so well. So the family has sent the kid brother Thomas to come and help him out. Thomas is 18 when the war breaks out, and he's all gung-ho to go serve his country and, in his words, to see the world. And William, he figures now's a good time as any to chuck the whole farming business for a while and go sign up with his little brother. The two of them wind up in the cannon crews of the 1st Minnesota Light Artillery, and they write hundreds of letters back to the family in Wisconsin. We hear from the younger brother Thomas first, and then William. They're both spending the winter of 61 and 62 down at Benton Barracks near St. Louis.
December 20th, 1861. My duty on the gun crew was as number 1. Before the smoke lifts from the muzzle, I dash in, dip the brush in the sponge bucket, brush out the bore using plenty of water, then seize the sponge staff and sponge it out dry. Then number 2 inserts the cartridge, which I ram home. Then the shot, shell, or canister is sent home. Then I spring out beside the wheel and fall flat. Ready, shouts the gunner. Number 3 now pricks the cartridge. Number 4 jumps in and inserts the friction primer, springs outside the wheel and straightens his lanyard. The gunner gives a turn or two to the screw taps, then shouts, "Fire!" The gun rushes back with the recoil. The other numbers rush forward while I load again. And while you've been reading this, we would have fired 3 or 4 shots. Nothing is so exciting as working a gun in real action.
January 9th, 1862. Mud, mud, mud everywhere, 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 up to the ankles the moment you go out of doors. 2 or 3 pounds of it sticking to each foot. So drill is out of the question, and time hangs heavy on us all. My comrades are spending their money foolishly, and not a few wounds and some deaths have come from the men's trying to get by the guards to go to the city for whiskey. I am to be guard duty tonight. I hope I shall not be called on to fire upon a fellow soldier.
We're focusing tonight mainly on the events of the last months of the war and shortly following, the period of homecoming. But before we do that, I think it's important that we get a good, solid overview of the first 3.5 years of the war to help put it all in some sort of context. And we're glad to have some expert assistance with that tonight. Eric Jacobson is with us. He's a Minnesota native. He's been studying the Civil War for 25 years. He's published 3 books on the war and is regarded nationally as an expert on the Battle of Franklin, Tennessee. Tennessee is his home now, and he's come to be with us here tonight. Please welcome Eric Jacobson. So if you would, give us your historian's perspective on the outbreak of the war in the first 3 years of it or so.
Well, I think when I was asked to do this, my job is to bring this home and to make it gritty. Because what we went through between 1861 and 1865 was as traumatic an event as this country has ever undergone. And no one could have anticipated how bad it would be. From the country's inception, there had been a constant struggle over the issue of slavery. This was nothing new. And the political divisions were very deep. And there had been much debate, and there had been compromises, and there had been flaring emotions. But by the mid-19th century, it was apparent that discussion was running thin. And this constant fight and debate over slavery and its expansion and where it could be legal and where it was going to be illegal had ripped the country apart. And in his first inaugural address, Abraham Lincoln had made very clear on the issue of secession that it was the essence of anarchy. That if secession was allowed, there was no stopping it. If a state could break away, then a county could break away from a state, a township could break away from a county, and there was no end. And he laid down the gauntlet in that first inaugural. And he said, in your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, is the issue, the momentous issue of civil war, not in mine. There was a naivety in this country. There were very few people who could have ever understood how terrible this war was going to be. They thought it would be over very quickly, there would be little bloodshed, and then we would get on with being Americans. They were wrong. They were so wrong. They had no concept. They had no idea. They had no idea the nightmare they were about to be plunged into. And within months, it was very clear that this was far worse than anyone had anticipated. The hard hand of war began to rip the fabric of this country apart as an entire generation of Americans was gutted, dying and bleeding on battlefields across this nation, places like Shiloh. 23,000 casualties, 23,000 dead, wounded, and missing in 2 days. As people began to open their newspapers from Minnesota to Florida and from Texas to Maine, they could not even begin to fathom these numbers. And then there was Antietam, 23,000 casualties in 1 day. Then there was Gettysburg, 50,000 casualties in 3 days. And the numbers were mounting. And the Union was in grave peril. Minnesota's home front was dealing with a secondary problem. The U.S.-Dakota War in late 1862, about the time the news of Antietam came through the wires and across the pages of newspapers, it became another problem for Minnesotans to deal with. And the dying continued, and the suffering continued. Both sides, all Americans, dying in droves. And then there was the issue of slavery. And Abraham Lincoln dared to redefine the entire purpose of the war. There would be no more discussion about slavery. There would be no more debates in the halls of Congress. There would be no more legislation. There would be no talk of compensatory emancipation and gradual emancipation. Slavery was going to end. And the war would be the anvil on which slavery was exterminated once and for all, and Lincoln decided to draft what we all know as the Emancipation Proclamation. It was a military measure. It was a military document. It freed slaves only in areas that were in control by the Confederacy. It was a military measure to strip the South of its ability to wage war, but it was also obviously a moral document. It served two purposes: to gut the Confederacy and to eradicate slavery from the landscape of America once and for all. And then as 1863 moved forward, it seemed there might be a path to victory and the Union might be preserved and this horrible war could come to an end. With the victories at Gettysburg and the fall of Vicksburg and the South was severed, there seemed to be a path. And then the door was slammed shut once again, and the war dragged on and on and on. And then 1864 dawned, and there was a stalemate. In Virginia, Robert E. Lee and U.S. Grant would engage in battles as catastrophic as Americans have ever experienced. 100,000 casualties in 5 weeks. Newspapers were printing their first 4 pages, filled exclusively with the names of the dead and the wounded. You couldn't escape this no matter who you were. And the war had stalled on both fronts, east and west. But there began to be progress in Georgia. And then William Tecumseh Sherman took Atlanta, and Lincoln won a second term in office. In December of 1864, in one of the last great battles of the Civil War, Minnesota troops swept up a small hill known as Shies Hill on the outskirts of Nashville. Like a great wave, they swept over the Confederates, and the war soon ended. And soon after it ended, the president was assassinated. There were nearly 650,000 dead. In our society, that would be nearly 6.5 million people. Just imagine if any of us were dealing with cost on that level. The war was over. The war had ended. But the recovery from this war would take generations, and in many ways would take nearly another century before the promise of freedom would match with the promise of equality.
Thank you, Eric. Eric Jacobson. We're glad to have Kevin Kling with us tonight, playing a number of roles, including himself. Please welcome Kevin Kling.
When I think of Minneapolis and St. Paul, I think of brothers. I have a brother, and we fought and fought, but when the world turned on me, there was my brother, and I knew if he did to the world what he'd already done to me, the world didn't have a chance. In 1858, Minnesota became a state. I learned that in Osseo High School from Mr. Hipchen, my history teacher. Mr. Hipchen was one of those Dayton place people. He didn't want to be your friend. He wanted you to learn, and we did learn. I remember every Tuesday we would have a surprise quiz. He'd ask you 10 questions, and one question was usually, name one of the 7 dwarves or a flavor of Jolly Rancher. So one of us would get one right. And one of my favorite lectures, though, was of the Civil War. When war broke out, Henry O'Brien joined up, and he was a miller from St. Anthony. He was 19 years old. See, this is what Mr. Hipchen did. He gave us somebody to cheer for. See, most guys from Osseo didn't go to college. They took a trade or went back to the farm. So we had somebody now we had to cheer for. But a hero is only as good as his nemesis, and for that he gave us Robert E. Lee, a college boy, right, a cake eater. And he commanded the Northern Virginia Army, probably the best fighting force in the Western Hemisphere, you know, the Edina of the South. So And they were going to meet the Army of the Potomac, which included Henry O'Brien in the 1st Minnesota, and the Virginians at Gettysburg in 1863. The first day, Minnesota didn't see much fighting, but on the second day, they found themselves on Cemetery Ridge when 1,600 Alabamans charged their position. The Union needed 5 minutes before reinforcements could arrive, and so it was up to the 262 men of the 1st Minnesota to hold the line, and they did. But when the smoke cleared, only 47 men remained standing. All of their officers were killed or wounded. 83% casualty rate, still the highest in the Union. Henry O'Brien survived and even dragged another soldier to safety, even though himself was wounded. Mr. Hipchen told us that night the men would sleep among the dead, next to their brothers. He told about Isaac and Henry Taylor. Henry couldn't find his brother, and when he did, he wrote home, telling his parents they should feel proud because Isaac died facing the enemy. Mr. Hipchen also told about another boy who had enlisted with the family draft horse, Ben. Now you have to understand, farm boys, they mourned a dead horse just like they would a comrade. And this boy snuck out under fire to try to find Ben and happily wrote home that Ben was not among the dead. The next day, Minnesota found themselves in what was arguably the turning point of the war, Pickett's Charge, where 13,000 Confederate soldiers charged across an open field toward the Union stronghold. All of a sudden, Henry O'Brien rushed out, carrying the Minnesota flag. An officer yelled for him to come back, but Henry would say later, "I didn't hear him." Without any orders, the 1st Minnesota followed the colors and the fight was fierce. Marshall Sherman, a house painter from St. Paul, he was fighting barefoot because he lost his shoes the day before. He found himself facing a man holding the flag for Virginia. Marshall got the jump on him and was able to run with the captured flag back to the Union lines. At the same time, a ball had gone through Henry O'Brien's hand and it snapped the pole of the Minnesota flag. So Marshall Sherman took the Virginia flag off and with a strap from his knapsack, spliced the Minnesota flag to the Virginian pole. And the colors flew high once more. The Union took the day, and both Henry O'Brien and Marshall Sherman survived that battle. Both would later receive the Medal of Honor. 2 unassuming men, one from Minneapolis and one from St. Paul. One ran in with a flag, and one ran out with a flag. Minneapolis and St. Paul, brothers forged in combat.
Brother Green, do come to me, for I am shot and bleeding, and I must die no more to see my wife and my dear children. The southern foe has laid me low on this cold ground to suffer. Dear brother, stay and put me away and write my wife a letter. Go tell my wife she must not grieve. Go kiss my little children, for I am going to heaven to live, to see my dear old mother. Go tell my wife she must not grieve, and kiss the little children, for they will call their pa in vain when he is up in heaven. My little babes, I love them well. Oh, could I once more see them, that I might give a long farewell and meet them all in heaven.
That's Richard Crean. Thank you, Richard. Music was everywhere if you were a soldier, whether you liked it or not. So that one there we all know as the intro to Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy. But it actually is the call known as Assembly. And before that, of course, was Reveille, which means wake up. And if that didn't work, of course, there was this. Thank you. Music was the great communicator in camp and on the battlefield. Buglers had to learn 49 different calls, drummers had 40 different patterns, and soldiers had to learn to recognize them all because each one gave a different command. Music in the camps helped to keep up morale with really sad songs like The Dying Volunteer, and rousing ones like this one here. You feel better when you sing. And if it's a sad song, you feel better having sung it. 1 out of every 40 Union soldiers served as a musician. Fighting wasn't their primary task, but they were ready for it. They were often pressed into service as orderlies as well. But mainly they were out on the battlefields directing traffic. And some of them were the youngest in the whole army. Sam Badger from Glencoe was 13 when he signed up to be a drummer boy. Albert Wilson from Wyndham did the same when he was 14. Remember him? We'll talk about him more. Here's a song that came from the Midwest, out of Chicago, one of the great anthems of the Union Army. Do you know it? If you do, you might want to sing with us. Yes? 1, 2, 3.
As we rally round the flag, boys will rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. We will rally from the hillside, we'll gather round the plain, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitor and up with the czar. While we rally round the flag, boys will rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom.
The new year of 1865 began with a renewed sense of hope for the Union cause. Sherman's march to the sea and the taking of Savannah, Georgia, had been a Christmas present to the Union. The Christie brothers had been there. And the Battle of Nashville, a pivotal victory for the Union, one that killed more Minnesota boys than any other battle of the war. There was hope, but there was weariness and horror and anger at yet another new year of carnage. People dreamed of peace. Soldiers dreamed of home. Here's a homesick song from a Minnesota soldier, Captain William LeDuc of Hastings, Minnesota. He wrote a poem while he was stationed on Lookout Mountain in Tennessee, and he sent it home to his wife, Mary, and he specified that it should be sung to this old Scottish melody, Ingleside, which means fireside. Please welcome Maria Jetty.
Oh, the storied field on laureled mount, and the graceful birds fill the sea. Our fighting Joe with his brave troops are all very dear to me. But the quiet home, the darling wife, and the little ones on my knee are pleasures more than all beside. Oh, my happy home for me. This vale is green with forests rare, and the songbirds fill the trees. The fields have all their scented bloom, borne soft on the southern breeze. But till tree shell. I cannot turn with joyful heart till from mountain to the sea the starry banner waves in peace. Then my northern home for me. The starry banner waves in peace. Then my northern home to me.
It's not often that we get to salute a lame duck session of Congress for its accomplishments. President Lincoln, in January of 1865, though, was determined to take advantage of precisely that situation in Congress in order to write the abolition of slavery into the U.S. Constitution. So he spent the month of January strategizing, arm-twisting, deal-making, and on January 31st, the House finally followed the Senate's lead and voted to pass the 13th Amendment. And that night, serenaders gathered under Lincoln's balcony, as they often did at these sorts of moments. The next day, Lincoln found the bill on his desk, and perhaps absent-mindedly, he picked up his pen and he signed it approved, February 1, 1865. Now, technically, the president's signature is not required on an amendment to the Constitution, and the Senate, aggrieved by this presumptuous breach of protocol, immediately passed a resolution pointing out that fact. Within days, souvenir replicas of the 13th Amendment were being mass-produced and framed and hung over kitchen tables throughout the country with Abraham Lincoln's signature at the bottom. Lincoln's second inauguration happened, as inaugurations always did, on March 4th, the date that we take to be the anniversary of the U.S. Constitution. It was a Sunday. In 1865, Lincoln spent the morning signing bills and then going to witness the drunken swearing-in speech given by his Vice President, Andrew Johnson, which people blamed on Johnson's medications. Then Lincoln got into his carriage alone, and he drove himself to the Capitol, there to give another masterwork of American oratory. Like the Gettysburg Address, it's short, 703 words, a speech remarkable for its humility, its compassion, its inclusiveness, its theology. He steers clear of triumphalism, no matter how well the war is going for the Union cause, and he keeps insisting that we are a Union, and as such, we share the wages of this national sin of slavery, not Southern slavery, American slavery. So here's the end of the speech, delivered in front of about 25,000 people, just as the sun burst through the clouds on that rainy spring Sunday in 1865.
Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet, if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations.
Washington sparkled with parties for the rest of inaugural day and late into the night. Frederick Douglass showed up at the White House for a reception that afternoon. He was the first African American to be officially received there.
When we presented ourselves at the door, we were met by two policemen who informed us that we could not be allowed to enter. To a gentleman who was passing, I said, "Tell Mr. Lincoln that Frederick Douglass is at the door and is refused admission." To the policeman's astonishment, I was especially invited into the spacious East Room, where we found ourselves in a bewildering sea of beauty and elegance. High above every other figure in the room stood Mr. Lincoln. In a loud voice, and looking toward me, he said, "And here comes my friend, Frederick Douglass. Good, good." When I shook his hand, he detained me and said, "Douglass, I saw you in the crowd. How did you like it?" I replied, "Mr. Lincoln, I must not stop to talk now. Thousands are here wishing to shake your hand." But he said, "There is no man in the United States whose opinion I value more than yours. How did you like it?" I said, "Mr. Lincoln, it was a sacred effort."
Oh, fare thee well, my own true love. Oh, fare ye well for a while. I'm going away, but I'm coming back. If I got 10,000 miles, 10,000 miles, my own true love. 10,000 miles or more. The rocks may melt and the sea may burn if I never no more return.
Let's take a minute to check in on Madison and Lizzie Bowler, shall we? Madison was off as a soldier, and throughout the years of the war and separation, they've kept up their correspondence. Madison went home on furlough a couple times. They got married. Lizzie gave birth to a baby daughter. Now it's spring of '65, and Madison is down in Little Rock, Arkansas, where he's been sent to help recruit and organize a colored regiment. He's now pulling in an officer's paycheck, which he would like to hang on to. Lizzie, however, is at home with the baby. Spring planting season is coming up. She wants him home. He wants her to come down there, where they could make a new home together.
Dear Lizzie, I have half a mind to be offended at you for calling baby a great soft white pumpkin after having said that she is just like me. That looks very much like a sly way of calling your hubby names. I judge from your letter that you will not insist on my coming home until I get tired and quit of my own accord. That's a nice lady. We'll give you an extra kiss for your kind indulgence. Today is my birthday. Wouldn't you like to give my ears a pull? By the way, how old are you, Lizzie? And when is your birthday? I have forgotten. Besides, you can tell the truth about it now that you have me fast.
My dear Madison, Victoria sits at my feet on the floor playing. Her double teeth are coming through, has 12 now, is called by everyone a very large baby. That Barney McKenna is at home to try to get a divorce from his wife. I suppose he has found some southern girl that suits him better. If you stay there much longer, I expect you will be coming home on the same business. I do not know what I wrote in my last letter that made you think I was willing for you to stay in the army as long as you liked. I do not wish to usurp so much authority over my husband as to say that you must come, but you know what my wish is, and you can do as you please.
And who will shoe your pretty little feet? And who will glove your hand? And who mother will glove my hand, and you may kiss my red rosy cheek when you return again.
I guess that you do not mean what you say when you talk about not giving me any of the goodies which you are going to raise in your garden. You go on and raise a good crop, and if I do not come home in time to help you devour it, you can pack up a winter supply and come down here. Wouldn't it be pleasant? It seems strange to read about your being blockaded with snow while we have green grass, flowers, and peach blossoms here.
April 9th, my dear Madison, the fall of Richmond was hailed with great joy in St. Paul. We heard the cannon roaring all day. Baby is well. Our folks all send their love to you and all want you to come home.
Spring is warming up. Things are happening fast. The Confederate capital of Richmond falls on a Monday, April 3rd. Mary LeDuc is in Hastings, just a few miles from Lizzie Bowler. She must have heard the cannons from St. Paul, too. Mary writes to her husband, William, still on duty as an officer down in Tennessee.
The bells are ringing, and the people are shouting in the streets for joy. I have just given Floyd 10 cents to go buy a flag. Willie is already up on the street waving his. The schools have all been dismissed for the day. I cannot write. I am so excited by the news. We send more love than usual. Mary.
By the following Monday, General Robert E. Lee has surrendered his army at Appomattox. Bells ring out across the country, and a crowd gathers outside the White House balcony once again. Lincoln comes out on the balcony. He obliges them with a few remarks, ending with a request that the band strike up the tune Dixie. It's a favorite song of his, a song which he says that the adversary had tried to appropriate, but now had been fairly captured. Lincoln is back out on the White House balcony the next night with an address on Reconstruction. And among other things, he mentions for the first time in public his support for black suffrage. John Wilkes Booth is in the crowd. He mutters to his friend that it's the last speech that Lincoln will ever make. Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. is a classic old theater. It feels in some ways a lot like the Fitzgerald here in St. Paul. There are boxes along the sides. There's a presidential box over on the audience's right-hand side overlooking the stage. It's trimmed out in red, white, and blue bunting and a framed portrait of George Washington, just like it was on that Friday night, April 14th, 1865. It was Good Friday, normally a day of fasting and sorrowful meditation, a day of trying hard not to be in too good a mood, no matter how lovely and springy the weather. But Lincoln was in a good mood for the first time in a long time. That afternoon, he took First Lady Mary Todd Lincoln out for a carriage ride, and she said, "My, aren't we cheerful today?" And he said, "As well as I should be. As of today, I consider the war to be over." He said they should try to be more cheerful. He talked about how he dreamed of traveling, wanted to visit the Holy Land someday, talked about how in 4 more years they could leave Washington and go back to their home in Springfield or wherever else they wanted. They talked about their future. At the theater that night, at about 10:30, Lincoln was shot with a pistol in the back of the head. By 7:30 the next morning, Lincoln was dead. There were 2 Minnesotans who found themselves in the thick of those events the night of Lincoln's assassination. One of them is Alexander Ramsey, the former governor of Minnesota, who's now a Minnesota senator in Washington. He gets a knock on his door late that night. It's his brother, Justice, who's been at the theater and has just come running over to Ramsey's house. Ramsey and Lincoln were allies and friends for more than 20 years. The next morning, a small gathering is called for the swearing in of the new president, Andrew Johnson. Alexander Ramsey is among the dozen or so people present. Edward Duffield Neal gets a knock on his door at dawn. He gets dressed and he hurries to the office, which for him is the White House. Around here in Minnesota, we might know him as the founder of Macalester College in St. Paul, if we know him at all. But 150 years ago, he was one of Lincoln's clerks, entrusted with opening the president's mail, which arrived every day by the bagful. And on this morning after, April 15th, he's at the White House when the president's body is carried in and brought to a room just down the hall. Later that day, another delivery comes. It's the last bag of mail for President Abraham Lincoln. It was opened, he said, amid an awful stillness. All over the country, the grief and the anger, the worry were too great not to be shared. William LeDuc in Tennessee and his wife Mary in Hastings each dash off a letter to the other. Mary already has a hunch about the political implications.
April 15th, 1865. Dear husband, may God help us. I am sorrowful and cannot write. Charlie has just returned from up the street and tells us Andy Johnson is now to be president. I don't know what to think. I have no respect for Johnson. He is narrow-minded, I think, and unequal to the task before him. I hope I do him injustice.
April 16th. I have not yet recovered from the shock, nor do I suppose that the country has either. I feel as I suppose all do, stunned and revengeful, bitterly, intensely revengeful. While I cannot but tremble for the country now more than ever, I believe and trust that all is for the best. God bless you and preserve the nation.
Mr. Henry preached an excellent sermon upon our great loss, spoke most feelingly of the president's honesty and goodness of heart. Some others are less sorry because he was shot at the theater. I think the people must stand by President Johnson and make the best of him. If he fails in his duty, the law promises for his impeachment.
For some time, the United States Military Railroad had been putting the finishing touches on a private presidential car, a sort of Air Force One for the railroad age. By April, it was finished, and it was put into service to carry the body of Abraham Lincoln home to Springfield, Illinois, along with the body of his son, Willie, who had died 3 years earlier. The funeral train took 12 days to retrace the journey that Lincoln made to Washington 4 years before as president-elect. This time, his travel details were made public to everyone. It was a national outpouring of grief. There were 12 official stops where Lincoln's embalmed body was taken to lie in state in a Capitol building or a courthouse.
Philadelphia, 300,000 mourners.
New York, 1 million mourners.
Cleveland, 150,000 mourners, 3 times the city population.
Columbus, 80,000 mourners, 4 times the city population.
The funeral train was called the Lincoln Special. It had a portrait of Lincoln on the front. The schedule was printed in all the papers, and in hundreds of smaller towns along the route, people lined the tracks day and night as the train completed its 1,700-mile journey back to Lincoln's hometown.
Chicago, Fort Wayne Junction, Joliet, Illinois.
Cayuga, Lawndale, Lincoln, Illinois.
Williamsville, Sherman, Sangamon, Illinois.
Final stop, Springfield, Illinois. 75,000 mourners, 8 times the city population.
Lincoln was laid to rest in Oak Ridge Cemetery in Springfield. A huge crowd gathered outside the Lincoln House, and there, to greet them, were Lincoln's horse, old Bob, and his dog, Fido. Lincoln's funeral car never did any other presidential duty. It changed hands a few times before it wound up in the hands of one Thomas Lowry, the Minneapolis streetcar magnate. He called it the country's most sacred relic, and he loaned it out for exhibitions across the country. He kept it in a railroad shed in Columbia Heights. In 1911, a prairie fire raced through the rail yard, and the car was destroyed. It's estimated that fully a third of the U.S. population turned out to pay their respects during Lincoln's funeral procession, but the country was to have one more national procession before the month of May was out. Buildings all over were still hung in black crepe, but the Union victory was now official, and except for some renegades in Texas, the Confederate armies had all now surrendered. Jefferson Davis had been arrested down in Georgia, and with him, his dreams for an ongoing guerrilla war. So it was decided that there should be a two-day celebration in Washington, D.C. called the Grand Review. May 23rd and 24th, 1865, the nation's capital was swarmed with troops and horses and artillery and spectators as the two great Union armies, Grant's the first day and Sherman's the next, paraded through town and up Pennsylvania Avenue and past a big reviewing stand in front of the White House. The Christie brothers of Winona were there, except that they had been separated. They arrived separately. William, the older brother, had gotten out of a Confederate prison a few weeks earlier. He showed up in Washington just in time for the party.
May 27th, 1865. Dear Father, I arrived in Washington but could not see it, having to go through the circumlocution office until I was allowed the privilege of finding my command after much travel, sweating, and misdirections. What little I have seen does not look much like the capital of the United States. Owing to its location, it does not strike me as really very imposing or grand. You know, I do not know what it is, but it seems I can never now see the better side of humanity anymore. The time was I could not see the dark side, but it seems to me now as though I've lost the faculty of seeing anything but evil, and that continually.
Dear Father, on Tuesday we were busy making preparations for the Grand Review. Everything was all washed and oiled and brightened up, and clothing was cleaned. At 8 o'clock in the morning, we marched across the long bridge, and about 10 we passed in review. We marched for more than 2 miles. The whole of this distance, we were between living walls of spectators who cheered us at every step. Near where we entered the avenue, there was hung over the street a great banner with the motto, "All hail our Western heroes," et cetera, et cetera. And as we approached the reviewing stand, the vast amphitheater on either side of us rang with deafening cheers, and no wonder, for our brigade presented a most magnificent spectacle. Now, there are thousands of rumors about our discharge, but I'm inclined to think we shall be kept till the thing is over for good. So don't look for me short of 2 months. Yours, hopefully, Thomas D. Christie.
Here we go.
Gonna lay down my burden down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. Gonna lay down my burden down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I ain't gonna study war no more. 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 Gonna shout hallelujah down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. Gonna shout hallelujah down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war
We're in the Fitzgerald Theater, which is a historic vaudeville and movie house. It looks historic. It's got those wonderful box seats behind it, and in that way it kind of is reminiscent of Ford's Theater. It's a very intimate place. It's not an enormous space to fill, and when people are working on stage, they have a very clear sense of the audience that's right in front of them.
The audience was really engaged in this entire show. In the audience, I know they were Civil War descendants. I think they felt a connection to the stories that were being told. I know they participated along the way in the performance.
It's a fantastic learning experience to actually be in a historical place and to hear historians talk about the impact Minnesotans had on the Civil War.
I think it's incumbent upon all of us to look at that period of time and to see how that legacy continues to live with us to this day.
Shall we gather at the river, where at night angels may have trod, with its crystal tide forever flowing by the throne of God? Yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful river. Gather with the saints at the river that flows by the throne of God. Soon we'll reach the shining river. Soon our pilgrimage will cease. Soon our happy hearts will quiver with the melody of peace. Yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful river. Gather with the saints at the river that flows by the throne of
St. Paul Press, June 1st, 1865. Let us prepare to give them such a reception that the memory of it will be forever in the hearts of the boys in blue, as proof that the patriotic self-devotion of the soldier is still, as ever, the highest title to the love and honor of the American people.
Sergeant James Raymer of the 7th Minnesota Infantry, August 1865. We got to Winona about 9 o'clock in the morning. My father and mother met us as soon as we went ashore, and a glad meeting it was. And then I went uptown to see my friends, and on the way I met Mrs. Turner with 3 of her sons. As we met, she put her arms around my neck, saying, "James, I will kiss all the boys today. I had 4 boys in the Army, and today they're all home." Tears of joy were streaming down her cheeks. I looked across the street and saw a widow of one we had buried in Memphis. She stood alone and was weeping as though her heart would break. A number of scenes similar to this we saw while at Winona.
The summer of 1865 was the summer of homecoming, and thousands of men were passing through St. Paul to get mustered out at Fort Snelling. At the beginning, the city of St. Paul was caught unawares. Soldiers started quietly showing up in ones and twos, convalescents and ex-prisoners, a lot of them, released without pay and stepping off the steamboats and unannounced into the bustle of a city that was still in the kitchen, preparing for the party and not expecting such early arrivals. One morning in May found a group of veterans in a St. Paul street, penniless and hungry, begging for bread outside a bakery. So the city quickly set up a soldiers' home up where the Central Library is now, a building with a kitchen, a dining room, and a dormitory. Women volunteers ran the place, food was donated, but more and more soldiers kept showing up that May and June until the place was packed to the rafters. Finally, by the 4th of July, there was an official soldiers' reception committee and an official procedure.
The packet company telegraphed ahead that the boat was coming, and the committee stationed a lookout on the bluffs. When he saw the boat, a series of artillery salvos began, and the committee, the Great Western Band, and the Pioneer Hook and Ladder Company scurried to the levee. As the steamer neared the landing, the band started playing. The regimental band on board usually responded. The men swarmed ashore, and time was given for the usual excited reunions. Then marshals and military officers lined up a parade. The band and firemen led the arriving unit from the levee up along Wabasha to the state capitol. The mayor and the governor gave short speeches, and after this, the soldiers filed into the capitol, from which legislators' desks and chairs had been removed to make room for dining tables. There, a hearty meal was served by St. Paul women, volunteers. Outside, the Capitol's pillars were festooned with a banner inscribed, "Honor to the Brave. Welcome home."
Meet pleasures and palaces, though we may roam, be it ever so humble, there's no place like home. A charm from the skies seems to hallow us there, which seek through the world is ne'er met with elsewhere. Home, home, sweet, sweet home. There's no place like home. There's no place like
A pretty fair maid was in her garden when a stranger came riding by. He came up to the gate and called her, said, "Pretty fair maid, won't you be my bride?" She said, "I'm a true love who's in the army, and he's been gone for 7 long years. And if he's gone for 7 years longer, I'll still be waiting for him here." He took his hand out of his pocket, and on his finger wore a golden ring. And when she saw that band shining, a brand new song her heart did sing. And then he threw his arms all around her, kisses gave her 1, 2, 3. Said, "Now will you marry a poor young soldier? Let's come back home for to marry thee." "Oh yes, she quickly answered. "Oh, has my love come back to me? I thought that you had most forgotten. You've been gone so long from me."
Nowadays, we're used to talking about veterans and their needs as they return home, how they deserve better than what we give them. The Civil War was our first large-scale grappling with all of this. Our country had seen war before, but never on this scale. And Minnesota had never dealt with veterans before. Half of the young men of Minnesota went off to serve in the war, and they came back changed to a changed place. Many of them were ready and eager to step back into their old lives or to start new ones. Many of them went from military service into remarkable lives of community service and leadership. The governor's office of Minnesota is just one example. A string of 8 Civil War veterans were elected to that post. The last one was there until 1905. There were also many veterans who came back needing help. Amputees, the sick, ex-prisoners, those with ailments like soldier's heart or nostalgia. Our terminology and our understanding may have improved, but then as now, people struggled to figure out what it meant to do right by our veterans. 24,000 Minnesota men served in the Civil War. 10% of these died in the war, either from combat wounds or from disease. So that means that many, many thousands came home, at least through St. Paul that summer of '65. A lot of them stayed here, but a lot of them, we don't really know how many, but maybe as many as half, headed out west to make new lives out on the frontier as farmers and ranchers, railroad workers, or soldiers. There were lots of men who signed on to do another tour of paid military duty after the war out west and down south. In fact, Madison Bowler is just one of these men who stayed on as a soldier. And while lots of others are heading home, he's down in Arkansas with his regiment. He's helping to keep order. And he and Lizzie don't quite see eye to eye yet on their post-war living arrangements. She's up in Hastings. She's putting in the garden all by herself, taking care of the kid. They're still writing letters back and forth, trying to work things out. Here they are, one last time. See if you can pick a winner.
Dear Madison, May 20th, you still talk of staying in the Army. Don't you think that 4 years is enough to be a soldier? I think it is. You know, you talk a great deal about patriotic sons. While you remain in the Army, I do not want to hear anything more about sons or daughters. When you leave it, then I will talk to you.
My dear Lizzie, I have served thus far with but little pecuniary profit to myself, but now I can provide for my family and myself much more easily by holding my present position than in any other manner. My pay is now $190 per month. I have long been indulging the hope that you would join me here. I've pictured to myself the pleasure of seeing you enjoy new scenes and a peep at the novelty of military life, to see you enjoy rest and recreation. I trust, Lizzie, that you will acquit me of any purely selfish feeling in this manner. I wish I could talk with you today. My heart feels heavy.
June 18th, dear Madison. It is raining very hard today and very dull and lonely. I do not feel in the humor for writing much to you. Our folks are all well. Baby is real smart. Yesterday, we went out and picked a quart of strawberries. Don't you wish you had some?
Annette Atkins is here with us tonight. She lectures and publishes prolifically on subjects of Minnesota history and other history. She's a professor emerita at my own alma mater, College of St. Benedict and St. John's University. She's here to talk with us about a couple of questions that I put to her. One, how did the war change the lives of women, and how did industrialization and railroads and immigration all conspire to change the face of Minnesota after the war?
Wars are always push me, pull you affairs. And while much of tonight emphasizes the grimness of the war, of which there is a great deal, there's also always that undercurrent of energy and prosperity and growth that comes with a war. Immigration really slowed down during the Civil War years. So Europeans and Asians had to sit on their dreams and their wanderlust until the United States figured out what was it doing. It was too frightening to come during those years, so many stayed home. But it also speeded up the Americanization of immigrants who were already here. The Norwegians, many of whom enlisted very soon after they arrived, came to feel that it was that had made them Americans, and it gave them a platform and a right to claim full citizenship. The Germans were reported to have become more American, or at least thinking about more American topics during the Civil War. And the Irish even, or Scots-Irish, like our Christie brothers, they didn't come from here, they came from there. But being here, being in the war, you can see made them full-blooded Americans. The railroad also slowed down for some of those years, though the Congress passes the Transcontinental Railroad Bill, and the Congress passes the Morrill Land Grant College Bill, and the Congress passes the Homestead Act. All three of those had a huge impact. One of the greatest, actually, I think, in Minnesota was the Homestead Act. Between 63 and 65, something like 10,000 Minnesotans claimed 1.25 million acres of Minnesota land. So you think about what energy that would unleash slowly and then dramatically at the end of the war. With immigration, with Homestead, what you see during the war is sort of holding back. And then as soon as the war is over, there's going to be this rush and this gush of people into Minnesota and further into the West. And then there's industrialization. In 1860, the United States is behind England, France, and Germany in its productive capacity. By 1920, the United States is ahead of England, France, and Germany combined. The demand for goods that the war prompted results in this explosion of industrialization, begins during the war and really takes off after the war. Women went through a lot in that war. And there you can really see a lot of push me and pull you. Lizzie Bowler here, she gets responsibility and she doesn't want it. She wants Madison to come home as soon as he can come home so she can turn that responsibility back to him. But not all wives were like that. Not all daughters, not all mothers who got the responsibility for the farms or the businesses when their men went away. They tasted something that felt oddly like liberation. And when men came home, they didn't always want to turn over all of that responsibility, all of that power, all of that authority. So I imagine there were a number of relationships that had to be renegotiated after that war. So in any case, in every case, every person, I think, felt the war and then was going to feel the explosions that come after the war.
Annette Atkins. President Lincoln was talking about voting rights for African Americans just days before he was killed. The new president, Andrew Johnson, was not in favor. He felt that blacks were, quote, wholly unprepared for democracy. So what did Minnesotans think? Well, we were like a lot of northern states. Before the war, we were pretty divided on issues of race. We had a militia that was open to whites only. We welcomed the Southerners who came up here and settled in Minnesota with their enslaved people. During the war, the issue kind of went back to the back burner, even while more than 100 blacks from Minnesota went and served as soldiers. But things were different after the war. Minnesota politics fell under the control of Civil War veterans, men who were of the party of Lincoln and who were determined to pass a state voting rights amendment. African American folks were at least as determined. They were few in number. Here in Minnesota, there were only 260 in the whole state at the start of the war. And they didn't have a voice yet in the political process, but they made themselves heard. This is an excerpt from an open letter that was printed in the St. Paul papers. It was written by members of the Golden Key Club, a black literary group in St. Paul.
To the Honorable Senate and House of Representatives, we, the undersigned colored residents of the state of Minnesota, respectfully petition your honorable body to amend the Constitution of this state by striking out the word white, believing it to be a mark of degradation and the great auxiliary in supporting the unnatural prejudice against us who have committed no crime save the wearing of dark skin our Creator has been seen fit for us to clothe in. It does seem to us incompatible with the spirit and genius of American institutions when we reflect that we are taxed to support the state without any recognition of our identity or our citizenship. It is a diversion of the great moral principle that should more properly underlie the fabric of our glorious government.
William Marshall, the former commander of the 7th Minnesota, was elected governor of Minnesota just after the war, and he worked hard to get black suffrage on the state ballot. Twice, Minnesotans rejected it. The amendment passed 2 years before the rest of the country. Here's a song written by an African American who grew up in slavery and was a teenager at the end of the war. He went on to become a celebrity preacher and a songwriter, the Reverend Charles Tindley of Philadelphia, called by some the father of American hymnody. In his later years, he toured the country. He even made a stop here in St. Paul in 1927, stayed at the venerable St. Paul Hotel, where he was forced to use the freight elevator. This is a song that served as a model for a later civil rights anthem. This is T. Michael Rambo.
This world is one great battlefield with forces all arrayed. If in my heart I do not yield, I'll overcome someday. I'll overcome someday. I'll overcome someday. If in my heart I do not yield, I'll overcome someday. Both seen and unseen powers join to drive my soul astray. But with God's word, a sword of mine, I'll overcome someday. I'll overcome someday. I'll overcome someday. If in my heart I do not yield, I'll overcome someday.
Lots and lots of steamboats came up to St. Paul in the summer of 1863, carrying African American refugees from the South looking to start a new life in Minnesota. In May, the young preacher Robert Hickman arrived in St. Paul with a big group of followers who called themselves Pilgrims. They stayed in St. Paul and started up a church that they named Pilgrim Baptist. Another boat arriving in St. Paul that May was the Northerner, carrying 76 African Americans. They were greeted by a white mob down at the levee who were so hostile that the police said they were afraid they weren't going to be able to protect them. Later that same day, that same boat headed up to Fort Snelling and loaded up with the last of the 1,700 Dakota men, women, and children who had spent the winter as prisoners at the fort. Innocent people who were now being taken away into exile out west. They too got attacked by the mob at the levee on their way out of town. The Civil War did happen here. The U.S.-Dakota War of 1862 is inextricably woven into the larger national conflict, and it all brought fundamental and far-reaching changes to Native peoples of Minnesota. Gwen Westerman is here with us tonight to talk about it for a few minutes. She's a member of the Sisseton Wahpeton Dakota Oyate. She's a poet, an artist, a professor of English and Humanities at Minnesota State University, Mankato, and co-author of the recent book, Minnesota Makoche, The Land of the Dakota. Please welcome Gwen Westerman.
News travels quickly these days. The missionary John P. Williamson in 1864 reported that he was sending packets of 100 to 200 letters weekly between the reservation at Crow Creek, Dakota Territory, and the prison in Davenport, Iowa. In our Dakota language, those letter writers speak of their families and their relatives, their living conditions, their desires to be good people, and their concerns about their future in their homeland. Their homeland, Minnesota Makoche. On April 17th, 2 days after President Lincoln's assassination, Moses Itewakan Hediota wrote to missionary Stephen Riggs about our national tragedy. In prison in Davenport, Moses was one of the 263 condemned Dakota men sent there, many with their families, after the Dakota-U.S. War. He writes, "My relative, we heard the news that they killed the president, but it seems anyone can tell us anything, and I want to hear from you. The president treated us with compassion, and that is why we are still alive. But now it seems they have killed him, and we are heartbroken. Tell me, how will the Americans view us now? I want to hear exactly how they killed the president. That is why I'm writing this letter. And I want you to know every Sunday I do my best to preach to the people. That is all I will say. I shake everyone's hands. I am Moses Itewakan Hediota." The missionaries were the intermediaries in our language, in treaty negotiations, in trial testimonies, and in prison. How often were they acting on our behalf? How often in their own best interests? And Moses asks, how will the Americans view us now? What if I sing this song? Makoche mi tawa, washde wadakecha iwadowa. Mi hunka kepiden ichaga pikachen. We chahanaka pichen he weksuya. Those words say, I love my homeland. This I sing. My ancestors were born here, and their graves are here. I remember that. I will remember that. As all the others are welcomed home, Dakota people, Moses too, must have wondered, how long will it be before we are welcomed in our homeland?
I want to bring back Eric Jacobson to talk with us one more time. So, give us your perspective on the legacy of this whole thing. Why are we still talking about this, and what did it mean to Minnesotans? What did it mean to us as a nation, and what did it mean on the world stage?
As we approach the conclusion of the sesquicentennial, the 150th anniversary of our war, the American Civil War, I think it is important to remember that it matters, that it is important, and that it impacts all of us today, whether we know it or not. You don't have to have a blood connection to this war for it to be important and resonant with you. In fact, I would dare say that it is as important to someone whose family moved here 50 years after the war or 50 days ago. Because had the war turned out differently, the United States that we know would not exist in any shape or form. And so the mass immigration of the late 19th century, the early 20th century, and today would have been set on an entirely different course. In fact, it probably would not exist. America is not without fault. It is very clear that America has committed wrongs. Racial bigotry is nothing new. But there is something different about this country. This idea that was set forth by a group of men in the 1770s to establish a country that was different. And that idea was put to its greatest test between 1861 and 1865. And I think one thing that is important to remember when we look at the scope of time from 61 to 65 is that America was dealing with a crisis of its own making, but the world was watching us. This idea that the men we call the founders had set forth was just that. It was an idea of self-government. And that very thing was being tested. And we were killing ourselves by the hundreds of thousands in an effort to decide which path we would set forth in the aftermath of this war. But the world was watching. The kings and the monarchs and the dictators, Europe, Asia, South America, they were all watching. And here's why they were watching. Because what we were doing to ourselves, not just in a war, but how we were conducting ourselves in a myriad of other ways, were shining examples to all of the people across the globe that we could not govern ourselves. That the average person, put aside the fact that they were Americans, the average person could not be trusted with self-government. In fact, they were too stupid to be trusted with such power. They were too foolish and too irresponsible. They needed to be ruled by a king. They needed to be ruled by a dictator. They needed to have terms dictated to them. England and France desperately wanted to involve themselves in our war. They wanted back in. And other countries did too. They wanted our land, they wanted our resources, they wanted this. But England and France did not intervene in our war because they could never possibly side with a country that was trying to maintain slavery. The world was a vile, ugly place 150 years ago, and we were a shining light, and we were shredding ourselves, and the world was watching. And you know what happened? The Union did not dissolve. And in the course of 4 years, we took a system that had existed for 250 years in this country, supplanted by people who were not Americans, but Americans made it grow, and we destroyed it. And then the war was over. The Union was preserved, and slavery was extinguished. But how to fix the rest would take time, a long time. It took a long time to get to where we were in 1860 and 61, and in many ways it would take almost as long to get beyond it. The post-war years were difficult. You had the ascension of black rights. You had the disenfranchisement of many whites. You had feelings of revenge and punishment. And out of chaos like that, you have organizations that rise up like the Ku Klux Klan. The passage of the 13th Amendment, the passage of the 14th Amendment, and the passage of the 15th Amendment fundamentally changed the course of our American government, but it did not absolve all problems. The first Civil Rights Act would be passed in the mid-1870s. Its words eerily echo the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It happened 10 years after the Civil War. The first Civil Rights Act guaranteeing not just freedom, but equality. And 10 years later, the Supreme Court overturned it and said it was unconstitutional. And then that set the stage for a case that would end up in front of the court known as Plessy versus Ferguson. A man who was 1/16 black decided he wanted to get on a rail car in New Orleans, and he was arrested. His case ended up in the front of the Supreme Court, and they ruled against him. And it set the case, or set the stage, for separate but equal. And it would not be until the aftermath of World War II when the push began to turn back almost 100 years of wrongs and to fulfill the promise. Brown versus the Board of Education attacked the separate but equal clause. And it would be another 10 years before the 1964 Civil Rights Act was passed, almost 90 years after the first act had been passed. There has been great change in the last 150 years, and dramatic change in the last 50 years. The legacy of this war is that all of us, and I encourage all of you to, at least when you leave tonight, having a much better appreciation of how important it is to all of us. Thank you.
The Civil War left us with a deep well of stories that we've barely dipped into tonight. People who lived through a war don't always get to tell their stories or even want to tell their stories, but their lives are often a testament to the qualities that helped carry them through it.
Julia Laframboise, granddaughter of Dakota Chief Ishtachaba, or Sleepy Eye. She was an interpreter during the U.S.-Dakota War. She left Minnesota after the war to continue her education, becoming a teacher at the Santee Reservation in Nebraska, and teaching Dakota people to read and write, first in their own language, then in English. Died of tuberculosis at age 28 in 1871.
Jane Grace Swisshelm, pioneer writer and publisher of an anti-slavery newspaper in St. Cloud, left Minnesota to work as a nurse for Union troops and started another paper in Washington, died 1884.
Edward Duffield Neal returned to Minnesota after working as private secretary to Presidents Lincoln and Johnson, founder of Macalester College and pastor of Christ Church in Minneapolis. Sold his house on Summit Avenue to James J. Hill, who had other plans for the property. Died 1893.
Sarah Wakefield published her memoir about the 6 weeks she and her children spent under the protection of a Dakota family during the U.S. and Dakota War. Was called a traitor and an Indian lover. Moved to St. Paul with her husband and 4 children, one of whom graduated from Macalester College. Died in 1899.
William Christie, 1st Minnesota Battery, traveled southern Minnesota and Iowa with his younger brothers just after the war looking for farmland. Married and settled on a farm near St. Charles, Minnesota, remembered as a tender father and a kind neighbor. Died 1901.
Van Garen, born into slavery in Alabama, emancipated with the arrival of Brackett's battalion, remained with the Union troops as their cook and became Brackett's personal aide, followed his comrades back to Minnesota, and ran a milk route in Sterling Township, Blue Earth County. Died 1905.
William Colville, commander of the 1st Minnesota Regiment at Gettysburg, died in his sleep while in St. Paul with other veterans, attending dedication ceremonies for the new Minnesota Capitol building. His was the first body to lie in state in the Capitol Rotunda. Died June 1905.
Albert Van Spence, born into slavery in Alabama, escaped from the Confederate Army, and befriended Minnesota troops stationed in Memphis. Settled with his family in Litchfield, Minnesota, delivering coal, cutting firewood, and working as the town lamplighter. Played the piano, laughed deeply, dispensed candy freely. Died 1910.
Oliver Kelly and his sisters, pioneer farmers and innovators. He was clerk for the U.S. Bureau of Agriculture during the war, sent by President Andrew Johnson to survey the ruins of Southern agriculture, helped found the Grange in 1867. It was a national organization for farmers both north and south. The family's farm near Elk River is now a state historic site. He died in 1913.
Thomas Christie, veteran, 1st Minnesota Battery, attended Beloit College in Wisconsin and Andover Seminary in Massachusetts, moved with his wife to Turkey in 1877 to serve as Congregationalist missionaries, died 1921.
Benjamin Franklin Nelson, Confederate veteran, left Kentucky at age 22, came to St. Anthony and worked as a logger. Built a small lumber mill at the Falls, which became the B.F. Nelson Paper Company, still in operation in northeast Minneapolis. Served on the Minneapolis City Council, School Board, and the very first Park Board. Died 1928.
Lizzie Bowler stayed with Madison and bore 10 children. Eight of whom survived into adulthood. She and Madison returned to Minnesota after less than a year in Arkansas, settling on a farm in Bird Island, about 100 miles due west of St. Paul. They farmed. He served as a legislator and state dairy commissioner, moved to Minneapolis in 1901. Madison died in 1916. Lizzie moved in with youngest daughter Edna in Crosby, Minnesota, where she died in 1931 at age 90.
Albert Wolson, drummer boy with the 1st Minnesota Heavy Artillery, settled in Duluth after the war and played a leading role in promoting and sustaining the Grand Army of the Republic in its final decades. At the last GAR encampment in 1949, there were just 6 surviving members, and the organization was disbanded. There's a memorial to the GAR at Gettysburg. It's a statue of Albert Wolson as he was in old age, sitting, holding a walking stick, and gazing out across the field toward Seminary Ridge and off into the hills beyond. Albert Wolson lived out his life here in Minnesota, the state that was the first in the Union to offer up volunteers. Albert Wolson was the last surviving Civil War soldier in the country. Died 1956, buried at Park Hill Cemetery, Duluth.
My latest sun is sinking fast. My race is nearly run. My longest trials now are past. My triumph has begun. Oh, come, angel band, come and around me stand. Oh, bear me away on your snow white wings to my immortal home. Oh, bear me away on your snow white wings to my immortal home. I know I'm near the holy ranks of friends and kindred here. I brush the dew on Jordan's banks. The crossing must be near. Oh, come, angel band, come and
It's good to remember that whatever patch of earth we find ourselves walking at any time, that we tread upon the bones and the stories of all of those who've gone before us. It's clear that the stories of the Civil War lie thick along the terrain of this state. This state that's my home, it's a terrain that I've crisscrossed a lot, often on the bicycle, which is my preferred mode of transit most months of the year, partly because of the sense of moral superiority that it confers, but also because it's a mode that allows me to stop and linger and meander and wonder and wander. And I sometimes feel like, as a result, I know this place pretty well, the ups and downs, the smells, how it feels. And then I'm always running into things that remind me of just how much I have yet to discover. When you leave the theater tonight, look across Exchange Street, that little park there in the building. That's where the old state capitol was. That's where all the boys in blue came and sat at long banquet tables loaded with food and listened to long-winded welcome back speeches. Or, if you head the other way, head down Jackson, down to the river, just below the old post office, soon to be condos. That's Lambert Landing. That's the old landing, the old steamship landing, where families would go and wait to be reunited with their boys. If you head on up Kellogg, up toward the cathedral, before you hop onto the freeway to go home, you might notice the statue of the soldier perched high on top of a granite pillar. And that's the first enlistee in the 1st Minnesota Volunteers, arguably the first Union volunteer in the whole country. These are just a few of the things just within a 10-minute walk of this very theater. I could go on, and I often do. Fort Snelling, down at the far end of Fort Road, perched right there at the confluence of the rivers, called Mendota, the sacred holy Dakota place of first creation. Lake Calhoun, over in Minneapolis, named after a pro-slavery congressman, a lake that for that reason almost gets a new name every few years or so. Colville Park, Red Wing, the Wilson Memorial in Duluth, the Dakota War battlefields at Birch Coulee and Wood Lake, so many places to go now and to remember and honor these stories and these people. I went to Gettysburg for the first time just a few months ago, and to Ford's Theater as well, and a bunch of other Civil War sites in Washington, D.C. And on the day that I left, I walked to the Lincoln Memorial and walked up the steps and into the memorial. And on one side, on one wall, there at Lincoln's right shoulder is engraved the Gettysburg Address. And on the opposite wall, at his other shoulder, is the second inaugural. These two great towering works of American oratory, reminders of so much of what we aspire to as a people. The Civil War aspired to great things. It achieved great things at a terrible price. And it left other things unfinished. The war stays with us for all of that, for the accomplishments, for the sacrifices, and for the noble aspirations that we're still fighting to realize more fully. Race equality, equal protection, due process, the right to vote, the right to citizenship. These are all ideals that we took to heart and articulated in the Civil War and in the years just after, ideals that are among our most cherished and therefore our most contested. We're still working out the details, and that's been our journey since the war, and that's our journey now. So let's keep on it and keep our ears and our eyes open to one another and to the stories of this place, taking Lincoln's words, speaking Lincoln's words as we go.
With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations.
We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. Brother, sisters, all. Jacob's ladder. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are brothers, sisters, all. Every rung goes higher and higher. Every rung goes higher and higher. Every rung goes higher and higher. We are brothers, sisters,
Remarkably, we came together as a nation in the aftermath of the Civil War. We healed. We went back to our loved ones. We went back to the farms of Minnesota. We went back to the fields and our families. And we forged a new life. And I think that's very important to understand as we face future challenges. In that 150 years ago, we were torn apart as a country and still came back together. And the legacy of that period of time is so important to us to this day.